Phillies. Frank's got the Phillies Mailbag. It's open on Tuesdays, and he joins us now to answer your Phillies questions. Send us a text if you have a question for Frank, 609-403-0973. Welcome back, Frank. Off day for the Phils. How are you?
I'm well. How are you guys?
We're doing good, bud. Before we get into the mailbag, Phillies make a couple cuts. Their first round of cuts during spring training here. Pete's all upset. J.D. Hammer got cut.
Yeah, I'm very disappointed, Frank. That's my favorite name.
Yeah, J.D. Hammer, besides having a cool name, he did very, very well for the Phillies when he came over after the trade with the Rockies. And then he went to the Arizona Fall League, and he really impressed them there. I think the invite to spring training was not with them intending to use him, but basically to kind of recognize the good work that he had done for them over the last year. Same thing with Edgar Cabral, who last year he was at Lakewood, and then he went to Clearwater maybe in June or so. And again, he went to the Arizona Fall League, impressed. And I think that opportunity to the two of them was kind of a way of saying thank you. And I think they really did plan to wait on Hammer pitching because, he threw a lot of innings last year. He pitched into the Fall League. And so, they got what they wanted out of them, get them experience around the big league club. And then they go back to the minor league camp. You'll probably see Cabral at AA. You might see Hammer at AA or AAA, however things play out. But I think they're high on both those players.
Hey, Frank, I tweeted out the other day, at what point do you just say, look, Scott Kingery's got to make the team? We all know the rules. We know that he's not going to make it, but he's hitting third in the lineup. They're playing him all over the place. He's been maybe the best guy on the field most days of the spring so far. So Eric wants to know, like many other people, what are the odds Kingery makes the opening day roster?
Well, for the most part, I think I'm still with this issue where I was before, that he is not going to make the opening day roster. However, I think that the needle might be moving a little bit towards possibly. But I think when it's all said and done, they're going to realize a few things. First thing is that they really probably will want to develop him at some other positions. You don't know how things are going to play out with Maikel Franco to a certain extent. You don't know how things are going to play out with J.P. Crawford to a certain extent. And you know what? The Phillies might make a trade somewhere down the line for a young starter, or so maybe if they acquire somebody like Danny Duffy and it costs them a corner outfielder, well, maybe then all of a sudden Kingery is an outfielder. I think they want to see him being versatile throughout the diamond, so that gives them more options going forward. Again, they might be in on Manny Machado later, and then there'll be another body in the infield. So I think they're trying to make him more versatile. And the best place to do that is to give him at-bats all over the place at AAA. I also think that, according to their standards in the past, he really hasn't seen a lot of pitching at AAA yet, and at least another 100 at-bats would do him well. I don't think they really want to necessarily deviate from that. And at the same time, too, there's still the contract issue that if they can hold him down for one more month, that's a whole extra year of team control they're going to have. So they'll have 6 years after this year, where if they brought him up right away, they would have 6 years, including this year. So I don't think that's the totally driving idea behind keeping him down. It certainly contributes to it. But by the way, the Phillies also have a pretty full infield they want to see play out. So with all that, I still say it's very unlikely, but I think they're watching him and saying, man, this guy's really good.
So, Frank, it sounds like Scotty Jetpacks is a long shot, but Matt wants to know who are your dark horse candidates to make the Phillies, either in the bullpen or on the bench.
Well, my dark horse candidate's rather interesting because considering who he was in the past. My dark horse candidate is last year's starting first baseman and the previous year's platoon first baseman, Tommy Joseph. Tommy Joseph has kind of been hitting the cover off the ball so far, not in terms of power yet, but in terms of average. And you know what? He's played some left field. He's taken some ground balls at third base. I think the Phillies like Tommy Joseph as a person, and I think if they feel like he could be a productive bench bat, not just at first base, but at other positions as well, they might consider bringing him forward. Because, if you look back the last few years, Brock Stassi, he didn't have much of a profile other than first base. But you know what? He hit so well, he did make the team out of spring training. The year before that, it was Cedric Hunter, who did make the team out of spring training. Now, neither of them stuck long term, but they both showed enough that the Phillies were willing to give them a shot when they had an opportunity. It certainly works to Joseph's advantage that he's already on the 40-man roster, and if they try to get him off the 40-man roster, they'll probably lose him to somebody. So it might come down to it at the end of camp, roster spots being what they are, and he's giving them a little more versatility. Maybe they do consider bringing Tommy Joseph up north, and I would have told you at the beginning of spring that he had absolutely no place on this roster, and I also probably would have told you that I would have been surprised if he was still on the roster when they got to camp, but he's still there, and he has the opportunity to impress, and so far so good. So Tommy Joseph is that guy I think might have a long shot, but might have a shot.
Frank, is there something to be said for just having a power-hitting right-handed bat off the bench, even though he isn't very versatile, just to kind of follow up on Joseph there?
Yeah, a lot of it too will be how he responds as a pinch hitter. It's a totally different animal than playing every day. And the people that have done well in that role, you think back to Greg Dobbs in 2008. He actually spent most of the game just in the batting cage, just being ready for that one at bat he would have to have. I mean, that's a really tall task, and you probably need off your bench somebody who can give you a long ball, and you probably need somebody who hits right-handed and somebody who hits left-handed. So it could play out that he is that guy. A lot will still depend on how many pitchers they're going to carry. If they have an 8-man bullpen, obviously that's one fewer roster spot that you can have on the bench, but what's probably the case is they won't have the ability to carry a lot of non-versatile players on the bench.
We're talking with Frank Klose, 97.3 ESPN.com. If you have a Phillies question for Frank, you can continue to text those in at 609-403-0973. Got a question from Matt who wants to know about Cole Hamels. Now, apparently, the Rangers are discussing going with a 6-man rotation. He's not too happy about it, so what are the chances that the Rangers think about moving Cole Hamels and potentially to a place he's pretty familiar with?
Well, I think Hamels, if you didn't see the story, they want to go with a 6-man starting rotation. Nobody has really done it yet. Now, in Hamels' comments, he kind of said, well, I think this is I understand that they want to do a sabermetrics movement. I don't think anybody's concluded that that's a good idea just yet, because besides the fact that you're not going to have every starter pitch every 5th day, that means you need an extra roster spot for that extra starter. I don't think it's going to work unless they expand rosters personally. But Hamels doesn't like the idea. He says, look, I came up this way. I've always pitched every 5th day. This is not something I'm that interested in. Hamels hasn't done anything to the extent of asking for a trade or saying he doesn't want to be there anymore. So I don't know if Hamels' displeasure at this point is going to warrant the Rangers even to consider moving Cole Hamels just yet. Now, if you're the Rangers, you want to win this year. I think Seattle's better. I think the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim are better. But the Rangers want to win, and if they're going to go into the season with Cole Hamels or without Cole Hamels, I think they would prefer to have Cole Hamels. Now, if you get to July, I think the Rangers would have to be very much out of it in order to trade Hamels, or to consider trading Hamels. And if so, they're probably going to try to cash in and find a contender who has some assets and really could be put over the edge and would pay a high price for Hamels. Could the Phillies discuss adding Hamels if he makes it to perhaps being on the trade market? I think they would talk about it. But I think for the Rangers, the way the team is set up, I think they'd have to fall really hard to even consider that, because let's face it, with 2 wild cards, you only kind of need to be within, not even at 500 anymore. You could be 3 games within 500 and you still feel like you have a shot at the wild card. So I would say such a move is highly unlikely. I do think that 6-man rotation merits watching. I can understand why Hamels would be frustrated. I don't think it's going to work unless there's a 26th permanent place on the roster. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there in Texas, but I wouldn't rule out a Cole Hamels return to the Phillies at some point later if he's still healthy, and if he's available, towards the end of his career. Would the Phillies entertain it? Probably, but I don't think anything's imminent in that regard.
Frank, real quick question on starting pitching. You got Lively struck out 3 the other day, pitched pretty well in both of his games. Now Eichhoff 2 2/3 shutouts. against the Jays on Sunday. Leiter pitched 3 hitless innings out of the pen against the Twins. Give us, it seems like handicap how that pitching spot, those 2 spots in the rotation are going.
Yeah, I think Ben Lively is going to make this rotation. I think Ben Lively looks pretty good all around. Not just looking at his numbers either. So I'm thinking that he's got an inside edge on one of those rotation spots. Beyond that, it's really hard to stay still. Mark Leiter looks really, really, really good. But then the question still remains, well, could he make the roster, but as sort of the long man role, but perhaps work his way towards the back of the bullpen as time goes on? I think that's more likely for Leiter at this point, even though he's being stretched out, although I could be surprised. The Phillies are still expected to add a starter, maybe by May 15th they'll add a starter, I don't know. But if the Phillies do add a starter, I think Ben Lively would be it. And behind that, I think it's still an open call, really. Who's going to step up of Nick Pivetta or of Jake Thompson, or Tom Eshelman looks pretty good. I keep coming back to Eshelman. I realize that he doesn't have the experience the others do, but I think Eshelman's looked pretty good so far. So I think, though, that I think it's still up in the air. I think Nick Pivetta might have the edge beyond that at this point because he's got a nice arm, but there's still a lot of spring training to go for these players for somebody to really step up and say, give me that job, I want it.
Frank, what about Hutchinson? He's a more veteran guy. Is he? He's pitched pretty well. From what I've seen, 3 scoreless innings on Friday out of the pen against the Rays. He's only allowed 1 run in 5 innings. Does he got a shot for either a bullpen spot or one of those 2? I guess 4 and 5 are still open.
Yeah, with Hutchinson, I think the problem with Hutchinson is he's not on the 40-man roster, and that works against him, especially when they have all these other arms that we keep mentioning. I think they would probably prefer to give a shot to somebody that's already on the 40-man roster, because if you start removing people from the roster to create room for guys you can otherwise stash at AAA, well, then you're really hurting your depth. But if Hutchinson goes to AAA and he pitches well, he could be a good candidate to come up later. And it's a shame for somebody like him because spring training doesn't have the same meaning it does for the others. But, Hutchinson, let's face it, he's a guy that was once a top prospect. He struggled a little bit. He had struggled with some injuries. He's kind of fighting for his professional life. And, somebody like him, he will probably, if he chooses to, because I believe he has an opt-out, he's got the ability to go to AAA and show over an extended period of time that his arm is major league worthy, and the Phillies can always go and grab it. But if you get to the point where you start cutting the likes of Jake Thompson or Nick Pivetta or anybody else on the 40-man roster that you think has some talent, you might be pretty sore later on if they go to another organization and find some success. So it's better to have Hutchinson at AAA and somebody else still on your roster than simply losing one of those guys that you can never get back.
He's Frank Klose, at Frank Klose with a K, and you can follow him on Twitter and send him questions for the Phillies Mailbag each week. Our segment with Frank airs on Tuesdays right here on the Sports Bash, and you can read the Mailbag plus all of Frank's Phillies coverage and listen for Frank's Phillies Minute on 97.3 ESPN. All right, pal, we're about halfway through spring training. You'll be down there when? Friday, right?
Friday morning. I have a bright and early flight, and I can't wait to go back.
Yeah, I'll be following him down there. So he'll be down there, live reports from Frank in Clearwater, and then I'll be down there on Wednesday, the 14th.
How many live reports are you going to do?
However many you want, pal.
Oh,
Sports
really?
Bash Live.
I didn't know the number was going to be more than 0.
Oh, I've called in many years.
All right.
From live down
Okay.
there. All right, Sports Bash Live. Thanks, Frank.
Thanks, guys.